Okay. Yeah, we're here in HQ2. We got kicked out of HQ1 after unfortunate circumstances,
Yeah, we're not going to go into the circumstances of why we're here now.
but we're in HQ2. Um, we talked about your sixth sense. All right, well, this is something we talked about earlier with the Diamondback dealers and whether a customer should buy a rod directly from you or on the website or go to a local dealer, and how do they find a dealer?
The best way to buy a fly rod is to have it in your hand. And I'm a huge proponent of feeling the stuff that you want to fish with before getting it, casting it if possible. With the nymph rods, you kind of flex them more than cast them. But Diamondback is really proud to have a nice dealer network of shops across the country. We'd like to have more dealers than we have, but we have a nice collection of dealers. And there's some pockets where there's a lot more than others. In the Northeast and the Southeast, we've got more dealers. In the Midwest and the Rocky Mountains, it's more of a sparse coverage. The West Coast has some shops, but we have a dealer locator on our website that shows the addresses and has a map where you can help locate what the closest dealer is that stocks Diamondback rods to you. And although we do sell the rods directly, we would always rather see rods where people can handle them and flex them and feel them in person. Have that be the avenue to see the rods and to purchase the rods. I think that's the best way always to make a purchase when it comes to fishing equipment is to have it in your hands.
I'd say also talking to someone and having a it's always a nice part about going into a fly shop is having a relationship with the staff and talking to someone about the rod. You have a relationship with most of the dealers who were familiar with the lineup enough to kind of give recommendations on what someone's looking for as well.
Yeah, the shop employees have the best idea of what equipment works best for the local fisheries. So I think that's another reason to be looking to a dealer to help select your product. If you're, especially if you're not an expert in selecting exactly what you need, making sure that you get the right rod. If you're going to spend the money for a high quality piece of equipment, you want to make sure that it's going to really match the needs of what you're trying to do. And shop employees on a local piece of water that they're familiar with is going to really be a great asset to make sure that you are buying something that matches up with what your needs are.
Or just reach out directly to you with all sorts of questions.
Right. We get a lot of, I answer questions on a daily basis for technical questions that cover a wide range of rod specific or fishing application adjacent topics through the Diamondback web portal. There's a question portal on the website that is easy to send things in to us, and I get to see all of those of technical nature are things that are going to come to me.
And that's something we'd be interested to answer here, correct? If someone is comfortable with having it kind of posted online with their name or even without their name, getting questions directly from the customer answered here would be
Yeah, I like to answer
advantageous.
things in a typed format, but I think that this will give us an opportunity to answer some questions that there's a lot of overlap of similar questions that people are asking to get questions like that and to use this format to talk about what we think the best answers are to those questions.
So email, Instagram, YouTube comments, whatever you desire, you can get your questions answered here. Something we talked about earlier was the parallels in your rod design when it comes and fly design. You've talked in depth about the rod design of our lineup here at Diamondback, but how does that go along with how technical it is compared to your fly design?
It's a really good question, and for me, there's so many things about the rod designs. They're just kind of industry s- secret type stuff that I can't share the way that I can share, say, details of a fly construction. But behind the exterior of a rod blank, there's a lot going on, and there's a big difference from one rod to the next, even though they might feel like, they're the same length and weight and even power in your hand. The way that the materials are tapered and angled in the areas that they're wrapped around the mandrels that helps make up the rod construction there's a big difference from one rod to the next of how we go about doing that. And so for me, as I have gained experience in the industry here and have had a chance to design rods for multiple companies and design multiple iterations of some of the same types of rods, say a nymphing rod, to be able to have something go to market and then to see what the performance and durability of a certain construction is, and then have another chance to refine the different aspects of a design series like that. I've now done 4 different full range series of nymph rods. So every time that I do that, the previous experiences from what has happened with those rods on the market really helps me have more to draw from when I'm working on, say how thin you can make the walls on the female side of a rod section before you start to have failure like cracks at the ferrule. So those are the sorts of things that having rods on the market and seeing where failures potentially happen contributes to being able to refine the aspects of a design to make sure that things are optimized, that the materials are being used in the most efficient way where you don't have any more than you need to achieve what you want to get, but you also have everything that you need in the blank as far as the backbone and the power to do the things that you need to do on the water, and also have the durability to, to be a fishing tool that people can trust to take that one rod and, take off from their car and trust that that rod's going to make it through the day. So there's a lot of things that I think you can't really see when you look at the rod that go into what separates rods and why they're different from each other, why they perform different, and why people have a different experience on the water with different rod models. So for me, all of the stuff that I've done, it is very similar to the way my flies develop over time, but that's a much more visible thing where you can see the exterior of the fly or maybe the interior weight construction, and you can see things change and improve. And with the rod, you really can't see what the improvements are if you have a two weight from a few years ago and a two weight now, even though there might be a lot of development that's changed from the design concept of the rod, just like a fly might change, but you can see it. And with the blank, you really can't see what's going on inside there.
Mm. And that goes back kind of to your design by feel compared to design by machine. When it comes to having rods on the market and getting feedback from that, physical feedback from yourself using it, goes into your design through feel.
That doesn't come from having rods on the market because I started designing by feel right from the start when I was designing. Having rods on the market helps contribute to refining those designs, especially with durability
Mm.
or efficiency, with optimizing, minimizing materials and still maintaining your actions and your durability. But let me talk a little bit more about design by feel though, because design by feel for me is seeing what the flex of the rod is and seeing what the recovery is. Because a lot of times in the industry, we are putting the rods on a deflection board, or in Europe, they do this measurement of ERN, which is
Hmm.
static measurement of kind of how a rod bends to a certain point when you hang like a bag of coins, is what they use to do that. And my problem with that concept is that depending on what the wall thicknesses are and what the materials are, you can achieve a certain bend profile a number of different ways. And so when something has a certain bend profile that you say, okay, this bend profile is a three weight, the three weight bends this much. If it was a heavy fiberglass blank, you could have a rod that bent that much and recovered at a third the speed of a thin walled carbon rod that was bending that much. And those two things would have a completely different weight and recovery feel in the hand and a completely different durability. And I think it's such a shortcoming to measure anything in a static way when it's not moving, because everything that we do fishing has to do with the movement and the
Hmm.
recovery of the rod. So when it comes to designing things by feel, what I'm looking at is when something in my hand bends, what it feels like when it recovers, how long it takes, how quickly the vibration in my hand dampens and goes away, how much power it takes to get the rod to flex to that point, and whether or not that flex is something that is intrinsically coming from the weight that's in the blank. So the rod is flexing under its own weight, or it's an action that requires the rod to be loaded by something to create that sort of flex. So those two things, very different feelings, and to be able to process what the difference is when you're talking about the recovery of the rod and not just the static bend of it. For me, that's what I'm designing around is those recovery feelings, and it allows me to take a blank and flex it in my hands at different points and snap the tip down and stabilize my wrist and see how it recovers. And I can tell all kinds of information points about the power, and oftentimes I can tell things about the construction materials of the rod just by what happens in, from flexing it in my hand and bending it and making it stabilize with my hand. So those are some of the factors that are different about the way that I design things and how the Diamondback rods are designed. That's very unique to the stuff that we do or the designs that are my designs.
You'll see some of that hopefully soon with the slow-mo kind of recovery of the rod against a wall, and see some of that in action um, in some social clips here.
I think that seeing the recovery of a rod and seeing where the rod bends down to and how the rod recovers from that, it's hard to see it in real time. But if you can see it in slow motion, there's a lot that you can tell about what the rod is going to do, how much force it takes to load it, and how much work your wrist is going to do to make that rod stabilize after the rod has flexed. And that's something that I think that's actually a more it's a better way to compare blanks than to just hang a certain amount of weight off of them. I think that if I was just seeing videos of different nymphing rod models in particular being flexed hard and recovering, that I could tell more from that than seeing a comprehensive data set of things, hanging off of it in a static way. So for me, there's a bunch of different reasons why that live action recovery is critical to understanding the rods, to designing the rods, and also it's something that you should be able to look at and get something from it when you see what the rod looks like when it is in its flex pattern and recovery pattern, how long it takes to get it to go back to being stable.
How is that important in a nymphing context specifically for the recovery and the flex?
The important thing in a nymphing context there is when we go to deliver a fly, after you load and unload a fly and you've generated momentum for that fly to be propelled towards its destination, while the fly is moving there, whatever movement your tip is making is throwing little wiggling slack lines into your leader that makes for waves of slack that you need to kind of reconcile and pull out of the line before you're going to have control of where the fly is it makes it harder to control where the fly is landing, and it gives you a little gap in time that you have to get everything under control. And so with nymphing rods, the faster that a rod is able to go from being loaded to being fully dampened out, so the tip isn't moving anymore, the more easy it is for the angler to control where the fly is going, what the leader is doing, and to get the leader under control in a way that you can get some sort of visual or feel-based strike detection after the fly lands, because the best nymph fishermen are able to pretty much get their nymph or nymphs, get their rigs under control as they're landing on the water, so there's no really gap between the fly landing and being under control to get strike detection.
Yeah. So it's an instant reaction rather than kind of a getting feel on where your nymphs are. You're immediate once you're in the water, you're drifting, and you know what's going on subsurface.
So many of the trout bites happen as a reaction to the flies landing, especially in the summertime as the water gets lower and the fish are more bug oriented. The fish are very focused on egg laying bugs or things that are up on the surface. So at certain times of year, if you're not able to control your presentations to get pretty instantaneous strike detection when your flies are landing, you might be missing the majority of the bites that are happening.
Messing around and trying to get detangled while you're
Or
set up.
if your rod doesn't dampen quickly, so
Yeah.
you make your forward stroke and your rod is kind of wiggling for a second or two as you're putting your flies down, that can prevent you from getting good strike detection as the flies land.
Mm, you're lost. Um, we have the new Gen 4s coming out. How are those gonna, what kind of gaps are those filling in the lineup of the rods right now?
So the two new Generation 4 Nymph rod models that are coming out this spring, they're coming out at the start of March here in 26, are going to be the 10-foot 7 4 weight and the 11-foot 1-inch 3 weight. Both of these rods are rods that I tune them into jig streamer type fishing as once I released the initial lineup of the Generation 4 rods, where all the trout size rods are really focused on microliter type stuff and being able to load and control the small flies. And then there's a 6 and 7 weight rods that are just completely bigger, that are like an anadromous fish or lake run fish size rods. But these two new models, the 10-foot 7.4 and the 11.13, are really good rod models for fishing jig streamers, fishing things that imitate, minnows or things like my crayfish fly, big stone flies, giant crane fly larvae, leeches, hellgrammites. There's a whole range of kind of larger bugs depending on regionally where you are in the country. Some are a lot more important than others, but all of those things are bigger hook flies that oftentimes big, larger trout are likely to be the ones that are eating them, and having the power to get good hook sets. And to the hook sets are critical. I shouldn't gloss over that. Really, having a rod model that allows you to control casting those heavier flies, to have the tip and tip mid power to twitch and manipulate those flies well, but really having the right rod power when you do get a bite to effectively get good hook sets and keep those fish retained because you get penetration with the hook. That really is the difference between landing the big adult fish and dropping them, and having a rod that's big enough to get a powerful hook set with the larger size flies that you want to fish. For me, that's a really important aspect of success when you're fishing for larger wild fish, and especially if you're fishing for you're fishing lower volume fisheries where you're not going to get many bites. You want to make sure that you've got the equipment that's going to make you get the hooks that you want and be able to potentially land the few bites that you're going to get from those quality fish that live in waters like that. So that new 10.7.4, that has the power to fish flies that are going to go up into size 1 aught, and potentially, if you've got fine wire hooks, even bigger than that, and still have the power to get a good hook set with those. Fishing 6, sometimes even 8 pound leaders, and that's going to be kind of some of the hybrid streamer type jigs. Sometimes there'll be jointed stuff, and a rod like that 10.7.4 is also going to have the power to do a wide range of things: smallmouth bass fishing, lighter carp fishing, walleye fishing, which is a topic that I intend to. Nymphing for walleyes is something I'm going to spend more time with Diamondback talking about, what opportunities are out there for using these jig streamer type rigs that a lot of people are getting accustomed to fishing, and being able to go and target river walleyes, which I think are a challenging and very interesting fish that's just as smart as a wild brown trout, and a nice opportunity here in the Northeast to target some stuff that's probably not as crowded and more of an exploratory fishing situation. So that 10.7.4 is a nice rod for a wide range of applications and species. And then the Lake Erie steelhead, some lighter winter steelhead, that 4 weight rod's going to have the power to do that. The 11.13 is a rod that has the length to just cover water with a jig streamer in a more cover water that's deeper, wider, and still be able to create really good angles with your line while you're down manipulating a jig streamer through the water, and have the tip and tip mid power to set the hook when you're fishing flies like that at distance. Because a lot of the times with the jig streamer fishing, it's not about having really big stuff. It's about being able to have good strike detection and really cover the water in the deep water and water further away from you where other people aren't really getting their flies and getting good strike detection. So that 11-foot 3-weight rod is going to give you a little bit of extra distance and a little bit of a better angle to maximize and optimize what you can do presenting those deep water presentations on places where there's pressured fish that getting that little bit better presentation can make the difference between catching them and not catching them.
We should talk about winter. What's going on right now? Topical.
It's winter.
What's going on outside? Epic freeze. How's that gonna forecast this the early spring, at least pre runoff?
Definitely going to delay our normal trout fishing start. That over the past few years, there's been changes to the regulations where I know for me, I grew up in upstate New York, and it was always an April 1st trout opener. And in the past, I don't know how many years ago, 5, 6 years ago, they changed to a rolling schedule where you can fish in the off season. And I really like to fish in that time period in the springtime before the runoff hits. And the reason that I like to fish during that period is you've got fish as the water starts to warm up from winter that are hungry. A lot of times, if it's brown trout, they're post spawn from spawning in late fall and they're looking for larger meals. And when the water is still cold like that, the fish are very daytime oriented. When you've got the light and the sun on the water, the fish are more likely to feed in the middle of the day. And so the really big fish and the fish that can become nocturnal during the summertime, oftentimes those fish are feeding during the daytime in the early season before runoff. And before runoff, you don't have any bugs really hatching yet. There can be the early stone flies. You do see some bugs hatching even while you still have snow out, but there isn't enough biomass in the drift for the fish to be getting the calorie intake they're looking for from the bugs that are drifting around. So in the early season, you almost always have these adult wild fish that are setting up in places near the current spills in the pools where the big food items move, and looking to get things like minnows, crayfish, cranefly larvae, hellgrammites. There's a lot of big things that move around early in the season that are a bigger meal. So for me, that period before the early mayflies, like in the Northeast, you have the blue quills and the early blueing olives. You'll get the Hendrickson hatch. There'll be the first real major mayfly hatch. And usually in the Northeast where we are, it'll be the start of May before you really have enough bugs in the drift for the fish to focus on them. So before that, those are times that I like to use those larger flies, all of it, for me, depending on when and where the place is. I have a bunch of large style nymphs and streamers that I'll fish with things like a 4-weight or a 3-weight in the springtime. So for me, a 4-weight is what I like to use when I'm using these bigger flies, because in the springtime, in that higher, oftentimes dirty water where the biggest fish will be feeding during the daytime early in the season, I'm looking for a trophy fish when I fish at that time of year. So I will use my biggest trout gear of the year during that time. The water is up, the big fish are willing to eat, you use bigger flies. It's the perfect time of year to use that 4-weight class rod and to be able to twitch those bigger streamers, animate them, and be able to get good hook sets at distance. If you cast, across a big deep pool and a fish eats it, where you have the stretch of 30, 40 feet of some kind of monoliter between you and that fish, you want to have a powerful, a little bit more power to create the tension to get the hook penetration when fish eat in those situations. So for me, this kind of before the start of May, this is going to be 4 weight season on the bigger waters and probably 3 weight season on the more medium sized waters that I fish in the Northeast and here in Vermont.
So the brown trout, especially the ones that are nocturnal during the kind of high summer hot time, a little more brave that time of year too. Just kind of going out and taking down a bigger calorie um, forage.
It's a tricky question because I think that nocturnal behavior is driven by different things and it depends on the waterway. Sometimes it seems like it's the fishing pressure that drives the fish to be nocturnal. And sometimes, pretty much everywhere that brown trout live, you've got older, especially male fish that develop kind of cannibalistic tendencies that often become very low light or darkness focused. It seems like it's more the males than the females that really get locked into it just out of natural causes. But on places like in the Catskills where you have these really heavily pressured tailwater systems, there you get a lot of medium-sized female browns that are feeding at night, and that's that pressure-based change where those fish are just feeding at night because there's so much stuff going on during the
Mm.
daytime with all the drift boats coming down that it's just more likely to get caught if you're feeding during the daytime.
What about the winter? Are we fishing right now? You out there with the nymph rod and the icy streams?
Yeah, the mono rigs that I'm fishing right now, I'm fishing straight vertical in holes that are about 8 inches wide because right now there's very little soft water. This year, 2026, there's some lakes that only freeze once every few decades that are freezing over. There's parts of Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario hasn't frozen over since 1934, from what I understand. I wasn't alive in 34, but it's partially frozen over now, and guys are starting to get out on parts of the big lake. It looks like, but I see maps of it freezing, and it needs a really cold winter to have water bodies like Ontario, which is about 1,000 feet deep almost, or 800 feet deep, freezing with all of the water turnover that happens in deep lakes. So right now where we are in Vermont, not much open water. There was a little bit of a warm up a couple weeks ago in January, and I tried to go fly fishing, or I was going to go and do some nymph fishing, and it wasn't happening with the ice and conditions at that time. So it's right now
Yeah.
there's not much of an opportunity where
I
we are.
I took that opportunity as well, and it was seldom to find water without huge ice sheets that you could get into and fish effectively. Have you tried to retrofit a rod tip with a little ice jig um, reel? Attempt your crappie fishing or anything like that? Panfish?
Yeah, I've made ice rods out of rod tip sections. A normal fly rod tip section, if you've got like a 4-piece rod, does not transition to having the butt section at the back that you need to
No.
do that. So it's not easy to do it. You kind of need. I have at a previous company, I have designed blanks where I expanded the wall thickness of the butt section and was able to use tip mandrels to make viable action jigging rods, but it's not an easy thing to do. You can't just take a normal rod tip and put like a handle on it. The back end of it doesn't have the power. You get too much of a flex across the entire part and not enough. You don't run into the rigidity to set the hook.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
But that's been the panfish game and a little bit of pike this winter.
Well, the panfish game, I think that contributes to your nymphing game.
Yeah.
If you are fishing by feel for panfish through the ice, or you're going and fishing by sight and feel with weighted flies on thin monofilament rigs with a nymph rod, there's a lot of similarities between those two things. So for me, I fish through the ice for smelt, which are minnows I usually catch them between 4 and 8 inches long, and bluegills, crappies, yellow perch. But the smaller fish, the bluegills, the crappies, because they feed high in the water column, and they're less aggressive than the bluegills, and the perch, the crappies are more of a finesse thing to to tempt and feel the bites with them, and also golden shiners that I catch and use for bait. But that's a fun thing to try to hook by feel, and to fish using the electronics where you can see the small fish in the water column. Hooking the small fish with little mouths, it requires a certain response to feeling the bite and then setting the hook and then having the tension to keep the fish on.
Yeah.
That's It's a weird thing to describe, but I had my significant other out brook trout fishing this last year in a place that was just full of 4 or 5 inch brook trout
Yeah.
up in New Hampshire, and she kept hooking them, and between getting the bite and setting the hook and having the brook trout on, they kept coming off
Mm.
because she was kind of pulling back and then not keeping a certain amount of light tension with the hook on those small fish to keep them pulling towards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some of those small fish ice fishing things, especially for me, the smelt are a tough thing to hook and to keep hooked. And it's a great muscle memory thing for your wrist for the hook sets, and to have the feeling of keeping retention on, of keeping pressure on things and keeping them moving towards you. It definitely translates to the nymphing application of hooking fish and keeping them hooked on the lighter nymph rods.
Would you almost say it's like committing to the hook set? Like you're kind of, it's not like a half-assed event where you're setting it with intention to keep tension on it.
No, it's really what happens just after the hook set tension.
Yeah.
It's because when people drop fish or bounce fish, there's things a rod can do that causes that, and there's also things the angler can do that causes that. And the thing that I'm describing is a matter of, after you come tight to a fish, keeping keeping the rod flexed as that small fish starts to move towards you, because of the bend of the rod pulls it towards you.
Hmm.
And the thing that can happen that's bad is if you let that fish get coming towards you, but it comes towards you it gets coming towards you more than you're pulling away from it to stay in contact with it at the same amount of tension,
Mm-hmm.
then it kind of overruns coming towards you, and you go from having more tension to less tension. And that's the thing that was happening as Stephanie was having these fish get hooked and then
Yeah.
come off, was she wasn't keeping the consistent tension on them as she was drawing them towards herself. She was kind of being inconsistent about how she was applying pressure to the rod tip. And it's the same feeling with that, noodle power 30-inch rod hooking a 5-inch smelt as
Yeah.
it is with that light action 10-foot 2 weight hooking a 12-inch fish, that the bend of the rod also kind of pulls it towards you a little bit.
Yeah. You have enough power to bring it at you and set yourself up.
Yeah.
That's interesting with the and then besides that, tip up fishing for pike.
Not much crossover with the tip
No,
up
no,
fishing
no.
and the fly fishing. I do think that there is, with that nymph fishing, with the strike detection and hooking the fish. The pike, the only crossover is I catch the small bait like I'm
Oh.
nymphing for things, and then I impale them and let a predator fish eat them.
Your catch and kill.
Only for the bait. No, I let the
Only for the bait, yeah.
predator
Let
fish
everything
go.
let everything go. This is kind of goes into a little bit of what we were talking about, but your mindset when you go into a day of nymphing specifically, not necessarily what, I mean, it changes time of year and what you're targeting, but what are the kind of things you're thinking about as you're entering the water or just entering a specific area? What's running through your mindset there?
Well, the first thing that I do is, at my house, I'll pull out my strap vest, and I only have a kind of a couple bulk pockets, and I don't want to carry too much stuff, but I want to carry the right stuff. So I always separate my flies into types of flies. There might be the small weighted nymphs that I use, and the jig streamers that I use, and the big bug flies that I use. And the first step for me is always knowing where I'm going to go and fish, and then trying to arm myself with the right selection so I'm not overwhelmed with stuff that I'm carrying, but I have the right range of things that I'm likely to want to reach for. So choosing the flies that match up with where I'm going, kind of looking at the flows, looking at the weather conditions, and then choosing the right rod and reel combination.
Mhm.
So, if I know that it's early season and I'm about to go and fish for potentially large wild brown trout in deep pool water, which is oftentimes the type of stuff that I'm going to be targeting. I like to fish the deeper water. That's a situation where I'm going to be choosing a 3 or 4 weight rod, and I'm going to choose a selection of flies where I'm going to have some jig streamers, and I'm going to have some bigger flies like crayfish and crane fly larvas, leeches, and hellgrammites. And I might only have 2 fly boxes and a few spools of tippet, and I'll make sure I have the right rod and reel. In this instance, it might be a 10'7" 3 weight with the Ideal Nymph 3/4 reel that's all rigged up with. It's got some 10 pound Maxima Chameleon on it, so I know that I'm just going to need to make sure I know what cider I'm using, what size leader I'm using. But I usually only have to tie a couple knots to get to fishing from what I bring out with me for gear. And then I do like to tie the knots though, because when I'm going to fish, I always like to know exactly how my leader is rigged up and not to fall back on the last thing that I did. I like to have a fresh framework in my mind of what it looks like, what size, leader I have that the fly is tied onto, that my leader to cider to leader below it, the systems that I fish. I like to make sure that I know exactly what I have there, so I'm able to make an adjustment if I decide it needs to be longer, lighter, heavier, whatever that is. I don't want to have to be guessing at what I'm connecting to or what I'm changing. So that's another thing, is just being very aware of what the rigging framework is, having the right equipment, having the right flies, and all of that. I like to have that happen before I even step into the water.
Is that the same as if you're going out on like an exploratory mission? Like this sounds like something you have some almost goals set for the day, an idea of what's going to go down. But how does it change if you're going in blind or doing some searching in new territory?
The difference between what I just described there and like a full on day attack is, I'll in places where I say I'm fishing for the evening, or I have a little bit of time, I have an idea of what I'm going to do and how far I'm probably going to get from the car. When I don't have a framework of what I'm doing, I carry a pack. And so I'll have water with me, usually a caffeinated drink, and I'll carry, probably a rain jacket, a headlight, and I will carry a range of stuff for rigging and fishing that's a greater range of options than what I would just stuff into the billow pockets of my strap vest if I was going to go and, trout fish a local stream that I am familiar with for 3 hours. Probably wouldn't be carrying the pack with me then. But if I was doing anything of an exploration mode, or if I knew I was going to go more than a mile from the car, I always like to be kind of over prepared, especially with water. I hate running out of water and really getting drained on hydration. So anytime I think that I might be going far enough and hard enough that I'm going to get thirsty, I'll carry that pack with some extra stuff in it.
Try to cut out the limiting factors, water, food, those sort of things, so you can be fully focused on what you're trying to accomplish.
Even as we're doing these podcasts, I can tell when I don't have food in me how different my energy is. And it's not that I don't have energy to do something, but I'm not at my best. And I can hear it as I'm talking and giving an answer to a question. So fishing is the same way. If you want to really enjoy your fishing session, having enough sustenance in your body to not have your body be crashing, and also staying hydrated, so you've got so your mind is functioning fully, that has a lot to do with success, I think.
And ample caffeine and
Having a lot of caffeine contributes to your performance level.
absolutely, absolutely. Oh, gosh, I don't know how much we have here left. Anything specific you want to get into, Joe?
No,
It's on your mind.
I don't. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap up this session, but we'd like to get questions, and you can send them through a number of media channels. You can comment on Instagram, send Instagram direct message, and you can use on our website. We have a message portal, and that's a good place to send us a good complex question. And if you'd like it to be featured, you can go ahead and mention that, and we'll maybe mention your name and who's asking the question before we answer it.
Sounds good. Yeah, signing off. HQ2.
All right, guys. Good take.
Good night, humans.